I have my good friend, David Jacob. He is a sales expert. So, David, real quick, if you had 1 minute to tell the audience how to launch and grow a successful online business, what would you tell them?
Start with market research. Most people try selling stuff that they want to sell instead of stuff that people actually want. Once you know what people want to buy, do interviews with your target market, pay for people's time if you need to, get a really clear understanding of not only where they are now, where they want to be, find out what problems they have that kind of stop them from getting to end point. Once you've done the research, put together an offer, test as many offers as many variants of that offer as you can. If you have a social following, test it with them. If you don't, use cheap Facebook ads. And then whichever ones have the best click rates, record VSLs, put them up on landing pages, drive traffic with either, again, social or ads. Do all of the sales yourself. Don't outsource it in the early stages. Hear from the market what they actually want. Amend marketing messaging. Get to booking ideally like 100 calls a month, maybe 80 calls a month. Bring in a sales team. Find someone who knows what they're talking about to either run it for you or manage it yourself. And that's a pretty idiot-proof way of getting to at least 50 to 100K a month in ideally less than 3 months.
I have to say I've done this question a lot, and this is the most in-depth answer, but I'm still not satisfied. So tell me a little bit about, so you talked about running the ads. Yeah. Would you do any kind of cold outbound outreach? Because like you said, hey, we got to test this offer. We're constructing a few ideas that we have. Talk to us a little bit about, like, is there a certain amount of money they should run on ads to test the click-through rate? Is there an amount of like emails or DMs? Talked about talking to people.
I think it's really easy to get into like the minutia of like how to do this right, but it's kind of irrelevant in my mind. All you're looking for is statistical significance at like as low a level as you can find, right? Because true statistical significance is like a number that no one's ever going to get to. But if you can see that, you tested 10 variants and 2 of them actually performed pretty well and the rest of them are dogs, hey, probably the 2 that performed pretty well are the ones that you should test again. And then it's just iterative. In terms of like how much money you should spend on ads, as little as possible is the I guess flippant answer to that. But yeah, like I think a lot of people make this way more complicated than it needs to be. So I had a conversation with a client recently, and they are trying to like solve as for like why their community is churning month to month. And they've done some research and kind of done a lot of the stuff that I mentioned at the start. But the biggest problem they have is their audience is really poor. And like they just don't have the requisite runway to get the results that they know is possible after a certain point in the short amount of time they have. And I was like, okay, well, what problems do they have that mean that getting there in insert timeline, like let's say a month, is more difficult and it takes them 2 or 3 months? And once you solve for that, that's how you kind of speed up growth. So yeah, it's a look for the simplest answer to this question. And if you can't find one, go up 1 degree in complexity, not what is the most convoluted thing I can think of that would solve this problem? Oh, wait, that didn't work. Maybe I should try something a little bit simpler. Like always go bottom up instead of top down.
And then you've started a few businesses. If people go back to the episode with Shenny, they can see the business that you were originally a part of. And then if they go back to Max's episode, they can see that David is his sales coach. So we've got an absolute legend on the pod. Tell us a little bit about like your previous business and what kind of offer you're running today.
Yeah. So it's actually coming up on 4 years, I think next month, maybe the month after that. So plus minus 4 years ago, I convinced Shenny to not be a pharmacist, which is what he spent 4 years in a master's degree at uni training to do, and to join me on this cockamamie scheme to make online money work. And we started, I think, like most people in 2020, with Cold Email Wizard, Dan Fazio, his original Cold Email Mastery course, which I think was like $50 then. And we started that. We, signed a couple of clients, did okay. And when I say okay, we didn't really. We made like maybe 12 grand in our first year. I was doing it full time. Shenny was basically doing it full time. We made like basically zero money. At the end of the year, we joined Client Ascension, made 20K in the first we made 20K in month 3 of our first 3 months. So nothing happened, 20K in a month. And we were like, oh shit, okay, cool. Like this works. From there, kind of kept going. I started training our clients in sales because running a lead gen agency is great in theory. You give them leads and if they can close, you make money. But if they can't close, you get fired. And we realized pretty quickly that like we were handing them leads, they couldn't do anything. So I was like, okay, I've been in sales in various forms for like 10 years. Let me like put all of this stuff that's in my head down on paper. So I did. And then I asked one of our kind of more friendly clients, I was like, here, look, like, what do you think? Like, let me teach this to you. And if you close more deals, I want to a winner. And he was like, sure. So we did that. They got really good results. Taught it to another client. They got really good results. And I was like, okay, cool. Like maybe this thing that I've kind of created out of nothing is actually worth something. From there, that went on to us. We started Maility, which is a cold email software tool. That was a lot of fun until it wasn't. Maility went up in a giant fireball, which was a shame because it was probably the most complex thing I've done by a margin. Then I started a sales coaching program. So I ran a high ticket sales coaching program. We trained probably, I don't know, maybe 30 people over the course of about 9 months. And some of them have gone on to do like really, really well. I still got messages from them, some of them being like, yo, like I just did this. Thank you so much, whatever. But I got so burnt out of doing the cohorts that it just wasn't like, it wasn't the best vehicle for it. So I kind of took some time off. We tried lead gen again and it wasn't really working. My heart wasn't in it. I just didn't really care about doing lead gen for people. I took a fractional sales director job at a couple of different companies, which was cool. Really enjoyed that. And then, yeah, I started building a school community for like, I just didn't want to do the cohorts anymore, but I still wanted to teach. I still enjoy teaching. So I started doing one-on-one sales coaching and then building a school community that I still haven't launched because I'm a perfectionist and indecisive, which as anyone who is in online business knows are the worst two traits, and I should just release it beforehand. But I've basically set myself the challenge of having it done by the end of the month. And I have maybe like 6 hours of content left. So it's very doable to get it done and out. So I've said to myself, it's got to be done by the end of the month. And then, yeah, so I got hit up by a couple of people saying, can you help me? I run insert, online coaching ticket, whatever. Some of them were friends. Some of them were network people. And yeah, so now I help people scale info products with mid-ticket and high-ticket offers and teaching sales teams. And I also help founders like people in Client Ascension and others basically grow their B2B service-based businesses through sales coaching.
All right.
A very long answer.
Quick follow-ups. So
sure.
you had 12K for the entire year, and then you went to 20K in, what was it, like 3 months? Talk to us a little bit about some of the changes you made in the business that allowed that, because some people might be at that mark right now.
Do more outreach. It was that simple. We just didn't do enough outreach. So no, that again, a flippant answer. No, so the big realization I think we had was whenever we would sign clients, we would stop outreach, right? And this is way before the era of like, 100 inboxes, rotational domains, whatever. Like we signed our first couple of clients with 2 Mailshake accounts and 2 emails, right? Like it was a very different world to the world that we live in now. And as soon as we signed clients, we were like, oh God, we now have to fulfill for that. All of our time and energy goes on fulfillment. And we didn't realize that like that massive oscillation causes, a 3-month delay on whenever you're, going to sign your next one. So expensive mistakes. At the start, both me and Shenny were on the sales calls, and we realized pretty quickly, like after that point, that we had clients, and I basically said to Shenny, I was like, look, you do fulfillment, I'll do the sales, I'm comfortable with this, I know what to do, and our close rate like went up by like 2-3x. So I was like, okay, Shenny got the calls. So I say that partially as a joke, but like I think the bigger learning is know what you're good at, know what you can move the needle in your business by doing. And even if you're not doing it now, but for whatever reason that you can have a bigger impact doing X, like go do that thing. Like don't try and, haphazardly smash together stuff that shouldn't really be going together just because you think that actually, maybe I should do this for insert dumb reason here.
Yeah, and you obviously partnered with Shenny, and now you're out on your own. What's your thought on partnerships in general?
They'll make or break. They'll 100% make or break the business. I was really lucky in that when me and Shenny were working together, we have very complementary skill sets. So everything that I don't enjoy, he enjoys and is good at. Everything that he doesn't enjoy, I do and am good at. So it works really well when you can find someone that, is that complementary. I think that's the first thing to think about. The second thing is like you need to be able to trust that person wholeheartedly. And Shane and I have been friends now for Christ, coming up 10 years. So like he's like family to me. So there was never a question of like, is this person going to screw me over? Like, what is this, that, and the other? Like, we always said, like, when we first started and we came into it, it was very much a case of like, we are friends first and business partners second. Versus, I think a lot of people, when they get into business with their friends, they're like, we're business partners, and that means we have to do this, and we have to think in this way and behave in this way. Whereas we were like, no, dude, like, I'm always going to prioritize our friendship over the business because, like, what's the worst case scenario? Like, I lose my best mate, or this business fails and we just spin up another one and do it again. Like, who cares? So we always came at it from, I think, a slightly different perspective than most people who try and do online business with their friends.
And then, yeah, it's very interesting because I've had some people approach me about being a partner, and I'm just like, I don't know about that. Sometimes I just like doing it myself. So let's talk a little bit about, you guys spit up a SaaS. So you guys have really hit like every single piece of, aside from like, I guess you have the school group working, so an info product soon, like one info product. But let's talk a little bit about the SaaS, because we had Christian on here talking about ListKit. Talk to us a little bit about building a SaaS, some of the like difficulties, or like why you even decided to take that on.
Yeah, so building a SaaS is probably the hardest thing that I've ever done in business. It is, as someone that's non-technical, I would urge anyone non-technical who wants to get into SaaS building, like whoever your CTO is has to be like genius level intellect and needs to be able to be a project manager, not just a coder. Because the difference between, essentially like a head of engineering and a CTO is one of those people can plan and the other one doesn't or can't, right? And for a CTO, you need someone who is a planner. You don't necessarily need the best tech mind in the world. So for me, like I tried to run that SaaS company as well as I could, never having a run on, having any idea how to run a SaaS company, completely honestly. And it was a lot of fun. It was really hard. I think the biggest learning for me was like there is a rate of growth that you want, and there's a rate of growth that you should take. And I hold my hands up for this. I think it was very much like an Icarus situation. Like we flew too close to the sun and we imploded. When in reality, if we were like, hey, look, like this can grow steadily, it can keep moving, instead of kind of almost doing too much too soon, I think the SaaS would probably still be around, because we had a good product. It was well liked. It worked cool. But we got, I think, too big for our boots, and it blew up.
And then you moved on from the SaaS and you started taking on, what was it, fractional CRO roles? So tell us a little bit about, like, I think you're the first fractional CRO we've had on. We haven't done many sales podcasts. I'm curious. Maybe it's because it's the thing I'm bad at.
Probably a smart idea. Don't give salespeople mics. Like it just ends up with them yapping for way longer than they should.
Hey, we're a pro yapper on this pod. So tell us a little bit about like fractional CROs and like what kind of companies did you work for? Like what makes somebody a successful fractional CRO?
I think part of it is understanding not only like what is the vision for the product and what is the vision for the company, but also being able to identify and empathize with the customers that they serve. So the only people that I did like good work for are people that I could actually empathize with who you're selling to and why. And if I couldn't, one, that's a me problem. I need to solve that. But the other side of that is if there's nothing internal within the company, right? Like the actual founder or whatever doesn't really know why the person that they're selling to wants the thing, that is a huge red flag. And I think that was one of the problems that I ran into when I did it, is a lot of people don't know why their customers actually want to buy the thing, right? They are so focused on selling the service that has, the label of whatever they do, that they don't do any digging further than that. And then I think the reason that most fractional CRO jobs are really hard and they don't tend to go anywhere unless, you're basically selling a carbon copy of the thing you sold before, is you have to do all of that legwork. And that's not an easy job. But I think the other key skill is like you need to be able to coach a full team. So like you need to be able to be as good on the phones as the SDRs. You need to be as good on the demo calls or the disco calls as the AEs, right? Arguably, you need to be better at both of those things than anyone who works for you. And then it's the classic stuff. Like, do you know your numbers? Do you know the product? Do you know why people buy it? Can you put together, a playbook and something that has repeatability and scalability as the business grows. If you can do all of those things, then yeah, like fractional CRO is a good, gig. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I worked with a lot of cool people. I worked with I guess it's partially info come community. That was at the start of the year. A couple of B2B services companies. And then some of the one-on-one work that I do, I kind of do a very light touch version of that. So I put in systems into, B2B businesses, coaching companies, put the systems in, make sure that it's all working properly. They know their numbers. They know how to manage a CRM, because most people don't. Get everything into a point where, you can hit a pretty good level of growth just by having those super basic fundamentals and having them dialed in. And if you do have that, then any sales, actual sales coaching that I do is infinitely more impactful. So, yeah.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned right at the very end there is that sales coaching aspect. So one thing when I was working at BlackRock, there was a common sentiment is that traders don't make the best managers. So oftentimes people will be promoted because they're a great trader, and they're like, hey, congrats, you're a director of trading now. So then you have direct reports. Do you see this in the selling space as well? It's like, hey, some people are just good at selling. Don't make them managers.
1,000,000%, right? And it's I want to say it's the Peter principle. You get promoted to your level of incompetence and then you stop. And that's kind of the same thing in sales, right? You don't want to take your best salesperson and be like, you're now a manager. You've taken that fish out of water. They may have zero management ability. They may have zero coaching ability. They may not even have a repeatable sales process that they follow. They just gunsling their way to a ton of deals. Well, now you have a ship without a captain, because the person that's meant to be doing all of the things that lead to growth has no idea how to do any of those things. They now hate their job because all they want to be doing is slinging deals, and you just have a sales system that fails, right? So, for example, I know that I am good at sales. Am I a world beater? No. I just understand sales well enough that I can explain it to people in a way that is repeatable and scalable. So there are a couple of people that I know who are at the very, very top of their game, right? Absolutely unbelievable salespeople that I can look at and say, you know what, 100%, you are better than me. And I have absolutely no, qualms admitting that. But do I think that there are better sales coaches out there than me? No. Because the difficulty in being a coach is being able to explain this in a way that people can get it, right? It's being able to take, any given situation that you are handed to and asked to explain, and be able to give back useful, tangible feedback instead of just being like, you didn't follow the script. That's not helpful, right? You need to be able to diagnose and kind of do more with less, I think, as a coach than as, a salesperson in this case.
Now, I'd say, and I know this to be a fact, we have some agency owners listening to this and they're like, crap, I've really neglected sales, or it's just that kind of weak part in their pipeline. What's kind of the 80-20 of sales? If they're like, hey, I got all these things to focus on, give them something tangible that they can, practice with. Is it making a script? Is it just drilling the script every single day?
So I'm very, very this is the hill I will die on. I'm very anti-script. Scripts make you lazy. Scripts mean that you think linearly, and sales is not linear because no human conversation is ever linear, right? Scripts make it very easy for the prospect to realize they're being sold. And that sounds like an obvious statement, right? And they're on a sales call. Of course they're being sold. Yes. But no one wants to feel that way, right? And a lot of sales resistance that I see, B2C, B2B, doesn't matter, comes from people taking a very formulaic, almost cookie cutter approach to sales. So I have unhelpful tips for people. Scripts aren't going to help you. They're going to hinder you. And any sales coach that says you need to follow a script, and that is the party line, is probably in it for a paycheck, because they don't now need to think critically. The first question they're going to ask is, did you follow the script? And if the answer is no, you just loop back to point one, which is follow the script, right? 80-20 of sales, ask questions that don't make you sound like a dumbass, is the easiest advice I can give, right? So people tend to ask really what I call highly structured questions, right? So if, for example, let's say we were on a sales call and you come to me and you're like, hey, I'm thinking about getting sales coaching, tell me what it is you do. And if I then said to you, okay, so tell me how much the business makes a month. and you just role play this with me, right? We'll do a little role play for the listeners.
About $20K a month.
Okay, and an example of a very like linear question. Okay, and how much more money would you want to make than 20K?
Ooh, I mean, 100K would be perfect per month.
Okay, and what's holding you back from getting to 100K, right? These are all super linear questions. And in the back of your mind, and I watched it in your face, right? So anyone watching the video will see it, probably more so than anyone audibly. But you kind of rolled your eyes and you're like, for fuck's sake, I don't want to deal with this, right? Because people get sick of being asked the same questions, right? And especially when people now, more so than ever, are like going and shopping around at multiple providers, right? They're not going to pick one person and be like, I'm going to buy whatever this guy sells me, right? It's quite unlikely that they would do that. But they're going to get basically the same questions asked in the exact same way by every single salesperson. And if you're first, great, you got the easy job. If you're fourth, they are sick to the back teeth of having these same questions asked, right? But let's repeat the exact same exercise. Okay, Jax, how much does the business do a month?
About 20K.
Okay, and ideal world, magic genie, magic wand, how much does the business make, let's say 6 months' time?
We would love to hit 100K per month.
Okay. And what does getting to 100K mean that's different versus, 50?
Ooh, I mean, it's probably a bigger house. We're probably flying private, at least first class everywhere we go.
Okay.
All materialistic things, but that's what we're about.
But you as the recipient of those questions, for everyone listening, like you tell them like the difference in terms of how your brain perceived that.
Well, it was like to use like almost a game term, because I come from the game sphere, it's like almost a future projection. It makes you like kind of envision that future state where you're like, that was kind of fun. But yeah, I don't know the exact difference that I perceived, but it just felt different.
Okay. Did it feel conversational or did it feel interrogative? Okay. Did you feel like you were being asked questions?
Yeah, I mean, definitely getting asked questions, but I didn't feel like I was being interrogated.
Right. And that's the difference. I got the same information. I basically asked the same questions. But how you ask those questions is going to be an infinitely larger lift on your ability to get people comfortable answering questions, right? And I think that's one of the big things that people struggle with, right? They ask formulaic questions because they don't know how to ask questions in any other way. And that leads to buyer, sales friction and all of the other sales buzzwords, right? Like people don't want to answer your stupid questions, and that's why you're going to get someone being like, listen, all right, I'm done. Tell me what you do. Tell me why I should buy your thing, right? And it's because of that feeling of friction.
Now, I hear this, and it's funny because I come from a different side of more of the like gamer sphere, and it's kind of the guy that's like, hey, I need an opening line, or I need something to text her. And I was always of the opinion, give them a line, because they're going to be awkward irrespective. And I don't want their brain thinking about what they have to say. So for these guys that are like come from the engineering background, are highly structured. Do you still say like, hey, no script? I know you're a fan of like 3-pillar pitches. So like talk to us a little bit about like, is it really no script?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's say someone's super awkward, right? Like they have basically less than zero social skills. Mm-hmm. Are your how old are your parents? You have grandparents that are still knocking about or not?
No grandparents, but we got some 60-year-old parents.
Okay, so similar age to my parents. My grandparents, I have like one that's still alive in her 80s, but like as a child, I had more living grandparents. How long have your grandparents been? I promise you, there's a reason I'm asking about your grandparents.
Sure.
It's a very odd start to this, but I promise there is a reason.
I would guess like 5 or 7 years.
Okay, so do you remember like your grandparents being around when you were a kid and like them asking?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. If you explain, let's say your grandparents were still around. If you explain to them what you do now, what would their response be? They wouldn't have a fucking clue.
No idea.
Right? No idea, right? But they're your grandparents, so they're still going to ask you questions, and they're still going to try and understand. They might be way off piste, but they're going to give it a good go, right? And my logic with sales is you need to be like a curious grandpa, like a curious old man, because you are allowed to go way off on a tangent. You're allowed to get something completely wrong. But so long as you do it through the lens of curiosity, no one's going to be mad at you. Whereas I think a lot of people try with scripts and whatever, right? Especially if they're highly technical, they try and get to the right answer. And like a lot of the mindset stuff that I do at the start of my one-on-one sales coaching is like beating that out of people. So let's say you're trying to explain to your grandparents what you do, right? And you're like, oh, like I, help people start podcasts, and I run my own podcast, and they're like, oh, okay, well, what's a podcast? You have to go all the way back to that level, and you're like, oh, it's kind of like a radio show, but like it's recorded and people can watch it whenever they want. Like, oh, okay, interesting. And like, do people actually listen to those? And you're like, yeah, like that's how most people, like, no one really listens to the radio anymore. Like everyone does this. Oh, interesting. And like, there are a lot of people running podcasts, right? And you can hear like your grandparents and the way that they think when they ask questions like that. And they might go off on a completely massive tangent, and you're like, no, come back here, not over there. That's useless. That's irrelevant. Don't worry about that, right? But if you take the frame of someone who is, being that almost old man-esque questioning, as I call it, you have this ability to ask basically any questions you want and it feel normal, right? Because all the questions lead from the previous question or answer that you got. All of them feel like you're coming from a place of curiosity, not like you're trying to trip someone up, not like you're trying to catch them out. And it's like, I just want to understand what's going on. And if you can do that effectively, you will find that your sales results improve massively, right? And it was as simple for one of my clients. They used to start, and I think a lot of people do this, is like, oh, like, what made you come to the call? And I'm like, why? Like, what possible answer do you think you're going to get from that means that you now have an easier time? Because anyone that asks that question is looking for a specific answer, right? Whether if you're selling like fitness coaching, it's, oh, because I want to lose 30 pounds and I love you guys and I want to buy from you. No one's going to say that, right? If you're selling like B2B lead gen, oh, it's because I need more leads. That obviously, right? They're not coming to you because they need, a new website. So the assumed answer to that question is way easier to get if you just let people talk. Because people don't want to waste your time, right? No one's that, at least no one might be an exaggeration. Most people aren't that clueless. So if you say, hey, tell me about you, tell me about the business, and they're like, oh yeah, we've been in business for this long and we do this thing, and like, we use paid ads and we have some referrals, but we haven't cracked paid ads yet and the referrals are pretty sporadic, so we're looking to grow. You got a way better fucking answer than, I need leads. And it is that simple. But most people don't want to go through the rigmarole of just like being curious, because it's way easier to try and be direct, but it kneecaps you more than it like kind of, gives you wings, for want of a better phrase.
All right. So now we've got like we'll call it like childless or grandparent like curiosity, but we still need to like establish some kind of gap in what their like current state and where they want to go. Do you think just like that natural childlike curiosity leads to them kind of
childless curiosity is
curiosity? I'm
yeah,
thinking about children.
So I think it is as simple as that, right? Like, that where they're at now is you will find that information because they should just tell you that, right? And you can obviously ask questions, be like, okay, how long has the business been going on for? Oh, it's been going on for this long. And okay, and have you grown significantly since you've started? Have you grown like massively in the last 6 months, right? And you'll be able to find out kind of where they are. Okay, well, ideal world, where are you looking to be in X timeline, right? And there's the gap. It doesn't need to be more complex than that. But if you make it more complex than that, of course it will be, right? Like, but most people don't realize, and this applies to one of my mentors said this to me. Life is as easy or as hard as you make it, and that applies to everything within life as well, right? If you say, oh, well, I have to follow this really complicated script and I have to do all of these things and I'm blah, 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 blah. Well, yeah, then you will have to do that because you've set that is the only possible mechanism of you getting to the thing that you want. When in reality, if you were like, oh, I just need to find out where they are now and then find out what they want, probably at some point in the future, that's it. You just ask those questions in a way that is natural and normal in the flow of conversation and you get the answers. And that's it.
And then I know you're a big fan of the 3-pillar pitch. I'm actually not familiar with another kind of pitch, but talk to people if they're unfamiliar with that, what it is and like why it's effective.
Yeah, so I don't publicize this. So you've maybe put my foot in my mouth here.
Alpha.
Okay, I will give a very generic version of this so my clients don't feel like I've cheated them out of it. So this is something that I kind of naturally did when I first started in sales, just because like I understood that people just want to know about the thing, right? And most people rabbit on in their pitches for like 10, 15, 20 minutes. slide decks, you name it, like materials, you know what, right? And I started in brand and marketing consulting, and my old clients were like Google and Danone and Facebook and Pepsi, you name it, right? Like giant corporations. And we would give these, like 200 slide deck presentations to, insert senior leader of XYZ, business. And one of my first ever bosses told me, he was like, you need to understand that people are going to zone out during this. It is an inevitability. It is simply too long for them to pay attention to everything. However, if you split these 200 slides into an individual slide, and the only thing that you need to do is capture at the start of that slide, what are you talking about? The second thing is, why do they need to give a shit about the thing that you're talking about on that one slide? And then third, how this relates to the thing you're about to talk about next. You will be able to keep most people's attention, even if they zone out, for 45, 50% of whatever you're talking about, right? And they catch the beginning and the end, they will still know where they are throughout this, hour-long, 200 pitch deck slide, whatever, right? And I was like, so you're conscious that people just don't pay attention to this? And he was like, how long can you sit and pay attention to something that your boss has told you to go and sit in a meeting on? I'm your boss. I'm making you sit in these meetings. How regularly do you zone out? And I'm like, yep, okay, that makes sense. Shit. Yeah, fair enough, you got me. So I took that and I was like, okay, I understand now that most people's attention span is basically dog shit, right? There was a study that came out where, I think this was probably pre-2015, where they were like, the average human has like, a 2-minute attention span. And the world was in uproar, like, oh my God, it can't be that low. That's crazy. Social media is killing us. Now it's like less than 7 seconds. So if you genuinely think that someone is going to sit and listen to a 20-minute pitch where you are trying to sell the thing that you do, you live in a fantasy world. If you can capture people in 3 steps, you just explain the thing that you do in 3 fairly simple steps, and the whole thing takes you 2.5 minutes, you've got a pretty good shot of capturing at least some of the things that you say, right? And then it's about breaking it up. And it's like, okay, well, you tell them what you're going to do, and you make it very clear what the value prop is, and you make it very clear as to why that value prop should be important to them. And then you ask them a question at the end of that, and it's not like, did you hear me? It's, tell me why, or can you see why this is important, for example? Yes. Okay, great. Move on to the next step, right? You move on to the next step. And then at the end of it, you're like, okay, cool. Like, which of the stuff that just came out of my mouth is actually helpful for you? And they're like, oh, this part. Great. Now I know that you actually give a shit, right? And I should be able to, in about 2.5, 3 minutes, keep you at least semi-engaged throughout, where you don't end up at the end of it being like, yeah, but like, what does this part do, right? Because that is the biggest problem that I see with people who do longer pitches. They end up having to do a crazy amount of objection handling at the end, where people are just confused. And why are they confused if you've already explained how the thing works and what it does and blah, 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 blah in the pitch? Because they fucking zoned out. They just didn't listen to you. That is the reason that you have to handle objections. It's because people just zone out of the conversation because they're thinking about what they're going to have for dinner, or the fact that, their kids are running around outside and they're wondering if anything got broken, or their missus had an argument with them in the morning and that's still taking up, mental energy. Of course they're not going to be able to listen to you. So if you can simplify your pitch down so it takes, ideally anywhere between 2.5 and 4 minutes, and you can break that up into 3 fairly logical steps. We do this, and then we do this, and then we do this, and you check in with them each time in between. You're like, can you see why this is helpful? You will have a pretty solid pitch in your hands.
Yeah, and for people on the attention span thing, it's kind of like when your friend shows you a video and you have about 3 seconds before you kind of zone out if it's not completely up your alley. Yeah. So just imagine on a sales call, even less.
Yeah, 100%. And I use something similar, right? Like, are you a TikTok guy or no? Yeah, okay. So how fast does it take you to swipe on TikTok?
Ooh. If I don't like something, honestly, it could be a second, maybe more.
Right? And you're making a snap judgment based on what? Some image stimuli and maybe some sound. But in a
Maybe
second, you're
some
not
sound.
really going to get any real sound from that, right? So imagine now, most people are probably getting to the pitch about 20 minutes in. You've already had someone who's managed to maybe potentially stay attention-wise till that point. And now you're going to sit and drone on for another 20 minutes about the thing that you really care about, that they're probably not all that invested in anyway. No way. If the first sign that they hear something that's not 100% up their alley, lost them, gone. And they might zone back in, they might not. Who knows?
Yeah. And then another thing you have is you're really interested in sales psychology being kind of like the overarching philosophy you hold. So talk to us a
Yeah.
little bit about like what is like sales psychology? Is it like tricks? It seems like you don't really do scripts. We got the
Yeah.
childlike as opposed to childless
Yeah.
curiosity. So tell us a little bit about that sales psychology.
Yeah. So far as I'm aware, I'm the only person that really talks about this. And I think other sales coaches like to talk about how, you've got to understand psychology and whatever else. But it doesn't come from a basis in psychology, it comes from a basis in sales. When I realized that I hated my consulting job and I wanted to quit, I managed to, by happenstance, intern with these two guys based out of San Francisco who were neuromarketers. So it's the application of neuroscience, behavioral psychology to marketing. And I was like, that's interesting to me. That's fascinating. I don't know anything about that. That feels like something that makes sense intuitively, but it's not being talked about. I don't really find any real useful, quote unquote, stuff about it on the internet. All right, cool. Like, let me see what this is about. And I interned with them for, oh God, I don't remember how long, like maybe 8 months, maybe something like that. And after a while, one of them said, hey, like, there's like 10 people on the planet who know about neuromarketing, and you interned with 2 of them. Like, when are you going to start your own thing? You hate your job. Like, why don't you just do that? And I was like, yeah, I'm 23 years old. Like, there is no way that I'm starting my own thing. Like, I don't know enough. And they were like, no, like, you really do. Like, you understand this really well. Like, go do it. Now, that's all well and good when one of them is a Stanford PhD and the other one's been a Fortune 500 marketing director. Like, yeah, it's great for you. You have life experience. You have a basis for the thing that you're trying to go and do. Whereas I didn't. But I realized that I was good and I did enjoy sales way more than I did marketing. So I was like, okay, how much of the stuff that I've been doing within neuromarketing can I apply to sales? Like, how much of this actually does match up versus how much of it is like post hoc rationalization, like, oh, well, this is why this works. And I realized that actually intuitively, based on the stuff that I'd learned, there were a bunch of stuff that did make sense to me. So I then did the same thing I was doing on this internship. I sat and I read the psych journals. I read all the pop psychology books. I looked at every resource out there that was talking about the intersection of psychology and sales. And I was like, a lot of this is like nice, but it doesn't actually explain stuff. So I took it upon myself to basically create my own methodology of like teaching sales and understanding human beings and people and psychology and whatever else. And it was like, here's all the stuff that you need to know. Here's how you get to the point of understanding how the human brain works, and then layering sales on top of that. So that's why I say, like, the psychology stuff is the baseline, and then the sales stuff and the sales tactics is the stuff that lays on top that then allows you to make it useful versus just reading psychology textbooks. I think the big thing that most people fail to understand is if you just, and I mean this exclusively, if you just had a better understanding of cognitive biases and heuristics, you would be better at sales. And there's one book that you need to read, genuinely. And it's so easily digestible. It's called The
Influenced by
No, it's not Influenced by Cialdini. It's not. Influenced by Cialdini is like the ultimate pop psychology book, and he takes 300 odd pages to explain something that he could have put on like 2 sides of A4. Like, no. And that's probably like a massive faux pas. But that's exactly why I say, like, people don't understand the psychology well enough. It is The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf DeBelly. And it has like 104, I think, something like that, cognitive biases and heuristics. And if you just understand that, you will understand how people's brains work infinitely better, right? And just that and that alone will mean that you have better sales outcomes because you now understand how people think better, and you'll be able to catch your own biases and heuristics and ideally minimize them. You'll never get rid of them, but you'll minimize them. So I think it's just one of those things where most people, when they think about psychology, the first book that I always get asked, like when I say like, oh yeah, I'm in sales, they're like, oh, like, did you really like influence? And I'm like, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. Influence is fine, but it's the equivalent of like Papa John's pizza. Like, cool. Yes, it is a book about psychology. 90% of it is eh. So yeah, that's my unpopular opinion.
All right, well, give us some actionable stuff on the cognitive bias and heuristics. Like, what are the most popular ones you see popping up on sales calls?
Yeah. So there's two ways of looking at this, right? So there's what are the biases that show up the most, and then what are the ones that you can use as a salesperson? Because I think both are relevant. So the ones that most people like, these are like the most like pop psychology ones at the top. Anchoring and framing. Heard of either of those? Yeah. So anchoring is the idea that you can give someone a piece of information and they will then use that to, understand the rest of the thing, right? However, if you look at, anchoring studies, yeah, that you will get, if you see the last two digits of your social security number and they're low, and then you get asked to pick what number will come up when you spin a wheel, you're probably going to pick a lower number. But that's not useful. Like, yeah, it's a cool little, nugget of knowledge, but what does it mean? Nothing, right? The actual understanding of anchoring that you need to have is, and this is also related to framing because they're very closely linked, people understand the world in comparison sets. Okay, so for example, Jax, how tall are you?
I'm 5'10".
5'10". Okay, would you say you're tall?
No, medium. Yeah,
Okay,
average
medium.
height.
Okay, cool. If you were like 6'5", would you say you were tall?
Absolutely, would love to be that tall.
That's all right. I'm 5'9". I get it. We're little. Okay. Well, what makes you say that you are medium height?
Well, I just know the average is 5'9", I believe, in the U.S.
Okay. If you'd never seen another human being before, would you say you're average height?
Well, it depends where you live. So when I lived in Denmark, I thought I was very small because everyone was like 6'1", 6'2".
Yeah.
Even the urinals were higher.
Okay. But if you'd never seen another human being before, you'd literally never come across another human.
No basis.
Okay. Would you say you're tall compared to a tree?
Nah.
Okay. What about a cat?
Yeah.
Okay. What about a building?
A building? No.
Right. But what you're doing is you're creating an understanding of insert thing here based on a comparison set, right? And if you understand that, you now can understand how to use framing better, right? So, for example, I'm again not 100% familiar with your offer, but you basically help people start and grow podcasts, right?
Yep, B2B companies, yep.
Okay, cool. What is the comparison set that people are using when they think about your thing? Is it, I can do this for free by myself, why the hell am I paying him? Versus, is it, well, if I pay him insert money here, that's a hell of a lot cheaper than going to a full-blown production studio, right? And if you compete with free, you probably lose a lot of the time. But if you compete with the nth degree expensive insert, all bells and whistles, crazy expense, podcast studio, production environment, etc., well, you're really reasonable, right? I had this with a very old client where they were selling like explainer videos for SaaS companies. And one of the things that they constantly had objections about was, like I could get this done on Fiverr for like $500. And I'm like, yeah, your comparison set sucks. Change it. They were like, to what? I was like, okay, well, hypothetically, if you went to a crazy video agency and asked them to do the same thing, how much would it cost? And they were like, I don't know, like 15, 20 grand. I'm like, okay, reference that. That's where anchoring comes in. That's where framing comes in. That's where the comparison set changes. And now you have something that's actually useful. But no one's talking about comparison sets because they don't understand it, right? They haven't gone deep enough in the psyche to understand what that actually means. So they talk about anchoring and framing, and it's like, you don't know what that actually is and how to use it, right? So that's what I mean when I say, like, there's some really actionable stuff out there that I could talk about for hours on end. But it requires like the amalgamation of 2 or 3 different bits of psych, and then the implementation of it within sales is where the fun part is.
Yeah, let's carry on the SaaS example. So your friend who's trying to change his comparison set, where do
Yep.
you have him introduce that in the call? Is it like,
Yep.
what other options are you evaluating? And then be like, oh, are you guys looking at these like super expensive agencies? Talk to us a little bit about like where you even introduce that comparison
Yeah, so
set.
you can absolutely introduce it pretty early on, right? So if you're in, let's use a video example, right? So let's say that, you found out that they're looking for videos to be used, ad creatives, all the stuff like on the landing page, etc., right? All the classic uses of these kind of videos. And you say, okay, cool. And are you, how early or late are you in the like looking for videos process, right? Have you like already had a bunch of sales calls with other agencies like us? Are you trying to do this on the cheap? Are you looking for, something in, like, where are you at right now? Or have you not looked at anything? And they're like, oh yeah, we kind of spoken to a couple of people. And you say, okay, so normally when people tell me that they've looked at a couple of people, they've found a pretty broad range, right? So like, I know I spoke to someone last week who told me that they got quoted like 25 grand for an agency. And that was at a pretty short like length of time for the video. Where like, are those the kind of numbers that you've been looking at? And people en masse go, Jesus Christ, that's expensive. Because it is, right? That's objective. Yeah. But if you are someone who's broke and you say, oh yeah, like our price is 5 grand, they go, oh my God, that's so expensive. Because where their natural kind of comparison set ends is based on what they have in their head. But now I've primed you with the idea that 25 grand is inconceivably expensive, right? That's like theft. So you say, yeah, and they may respond yes, they may respond no. The likelihood is they probably say no. And you go, okay, so are you like way down the other end of the spectrum? Are you looking on like Fiverr and Upwork? Are you trying to get this done on the cheap? And they're like, I mean, not really. Like, we're prepared to spend some money, but like, we don't want it to be kind of crazy expensive. Okay, so like, what kind of numbers have you been hearing? Oh, 5 grand, 6 grand, 3 grand. Okay, got it. And is that kind of in the budget for where you guys are looking at? I mean, it's kind of expensive. Okay, cool. So is this, and then you change the comparison again, right? So now, because you know that they're kind of in the ballpark, it's, okay, well, are you looking for something that you get done once and it lives there for 10 years? Or are you looking for something that, is probably going to be defunct in 3 months when the product changes? If you know that you're on the cheaper end, you obviously focus on the fact that it's going to get turned over. If you're on the expensive end, you're like, I mean, yeah, you absolutely can spend, $1.5 grand on this video from some random, Fiverr, Upwork, fancier, not completely shit, but not expensive provider. What happens in 2 months when the product changes? You can go back and spend another $1.5 grand, right? Equally, if it's going to last 10 years, you go, okay, so this is something that has some staying power then. Like, it doesn't seem like the product's going to change too much. Is your goal that this video that you make right now stays around and you never have to change it? Or are you going to go through the rigmarole of finding another agency and provider and whatever else? And they're like, oh yeah, actually, maybe I should spend a little bit more money than I have historically, right? And we switched it around, and lo and behold, that melted away. Never had the objection of that's too expensive anymore, right? Never had the, oh yeah, but Fiverr and Upwork are $500. Like, why can't you do it for that? It just disappeared because you changed the comparison set.
I gotta say, this is absolutely brilliant. I can see why people spend money on you. So let's talk a little bit about selling info courses with social media following, because I know this is one of your areas of expertise as well.
Yeah. So I think one of the most interesting things for me is you have people who have, fairly big audiences who monetize really poorly. And then you have really small audiences who monetize really well because they either have a really loyal following or they just start going crazy with ads. And I think the answer, like with most things, is probably it's closer in the middle. You absolutely should be building organic social. Organic social is, I would argue, 2024, like the most important channel. Ads are only going up in terms of expenses, right? You are never going to be able to capture, selling info like people did 8 years ago. It's just not the same world. But organic is growing every single day. I know someone who does probably about 30, 40K a month as a very, very new coaching program, teaching people how to do TikTok Shop. exclusively organic. And that, as a coaching program that he started, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, is insane. Like, that's a great start. And yeah, absolutely, go run ads as well. It's not an either or situation, but I think a lot of people will skip the organic part at the start and they're just like, oh, like I can just run ads. And I think, 10 years ago, that was a smart idea because ad costs were cheap. Platforms wanted you to run crazy amounts of ads. That's how, a lot of the revenue came from. But now you're competing with the fact that ad fatigue is really real. People don't want to buy from ads. It's low trust. People are more skeptical of ads and online education than ever, even though it's growing as an entity. And people want to buy from people they trust, that they've seen on socials, that they follow, that blah, 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 right? And I think algorithmically, it makes the most sense to focus on organic right now because algorithms are actively pushing you to create original content that does well, that is optimized for platforms, etc. So like, why not ride that wave? So I think a lot of people make a lot of mistakes with the traffic side of it. And then the other side of it is like, I spoke to someone a while ago that wanted to charge 10 grand for a coaching program that he created. And I was like, okay, well, what's the most expensive that anyone has ever paid you lump sum in one go? He was like, about 4K. I'm like, okay. And did they get result? Yes. I was like, how many of your audience, your potential prospect list, would gladly part with 10K, like en masse? And he's like, maybe 50%. And I was like, what? What do you mean? Like, yes, you're going to lose value, but the increase in volume that you'll get if you just lowered the price would be so astronomical. You would capture way more than 50% of people, right? And ultimately, this is what I mean when I say it's a numbers thing, right? You have to know your numbers. You need to understand the maths. Because if you can get calls on the calendar, but only 50% of them would ever be able to front the 10 grand, how useful is that, right? Yeah, you now have 50 calls that in theory could buy. Okay, well, not every call is going to show up. You're probably going to get an 80% show rate. So now that's 40 calls. Okay, of those 40 calls, how many of those are actually qualified versus just have the funds to buy it? Let's say another 80%. Okay, now we're not at 40 calls anymore. We're at 32. Okay, a pretty solid, accurate closing rate is anywhere between 25 and 35%. Okay, so in theory, divide by 4 or divide by 3. Well, 8 to 10 at 10 grand, yeah, not bad. That's with a really shit hot closing team. That's a 35 to 40% close rate. Okay, well, what's a more realistic one? Maybe something more like 20, maybe 15. Well, 15%, you're now making what? 40 grand a month. And that's if everyone piffs, which they won't. There'll be payment plans. So you make even less than that. Okay, take the exact same numbers. 100 calls. You sell something for 5 grand, right? Half the value. Okay, well now, let's say 90% of those people can actually afford the 5 grand up front. Okay? Well, the number starts at 90. You're literally going to win objectively more by starting at a higher number, right? It's not rocket science. But if you run that exact same math, so 80% of them show up, 80% are actually qualified, let's say 25% actually close, you end up with 5 grand by 25, 30 closes. You make infinitely more money, so much faster. And people like the idea of high ticket because it's like cash in the bank sooner. But if you just have a dialed in sales process and a dialed in sales team, you have something that is infinitely more scalable. And that's with 100 calls. What happens when you book 200 or 300 calls?
We've got the legend himself, and I know he has a hard stop, so I need to ask him where we can find him online. What's your Twitter? Where can people get in touch with you?
So I am making a push to actually be way more active on socials. I'm starting a YouTube. It will be DavidJacob_1 again. I used to be really active on Twitter. If you want to go back and read my old tweets, go for it. I need to be more active on Twitter, and I will be active on socials, basically with the exact same handle every time. So DavidJacob_1 across all socials. I will be better at posting content. That is my number one goal for Q4 is actually do content.
All right. So guys, if you're listening this far, give us 5 stars, go follow David, and get back to growing your agency.